outpouring of the soul. The nachman's practice of hisbodedus. Part of the sefer, of the book, the holy book, the chapter of nachman's practice of hisbodedus. In the beginning of Shitchiram, praises of Rebbe Nachman, nanach, nachman, meuman, in the stories relating his customs and toil in the service of God. We read the main service through which he merited attaining what he did was profuse prayer, supplication, pleading, petitions, and appeals. Profuse prayer, supplication, pleading, petitions, and appeals that he was very accustomed to express before God. He would appease and entreat God with a variety of supplications and requests that he, in his mercy, helped him merit drawing close to his service. Praying in Yiddish, his native language, was what made his prayers so effective. He meticulously chose a place where no other people went and would express himself before God in his native language, Yiddish, appeasing and entreating God and supplicating for him with a wide variety of petitions and arguments, arguing why it would be fitting for God to draw him close to his service. He was extremely dedicated to this practice, spending many years doing this. He would also hide himself in the attic of his father's house, where a room was partitioned off by a divider of reeds for the storage of straw and fodder. There he would hide and recite psalms and cry out in a whisper to God to allow him to merit drawing close to him. There was not one single prayer found in any of our holy books that he did not recite many times, whether psalms or the book of Sharet, seeing the supplications printed in the large prayer books, or various other requests and supplications, even the supplications printed in Yiddish. He did not neglect reciting any of them. He was accustomed to reciting the supplications following the meuman, additional prayers following the standard prayers divided according to the days of the week, printed after each of the daily divisions. But he would recite the entire week's supplications in one sitting. Sometimes he would recite the psalm from Psalms, only the verses of supplication and requests and crying out to God, only the verses of supplication and requests and crying out to God, skipping all the rest, reciting all these verses in one sitting. Aside from all this, he always prayed in his own words, speaking out before God from his heart in Yiddish, praying and pleading with God with many different pleas, supplications, and requests, expressing his own thoughts and emotions as mentioned above, that God grant him to merit his service. This was the main thing that helped him merit what he did. We heard this explicitly from his holy mouth several times while speaking from his heart before God. Elegant arguments and eloquence, well-ordered prayers would emerge from his mouth, and these found favor in his eyes. He would then write them down for recollection so that he would be able to repeat them again later. So the rebbe, nanach, nachman, meuman, was accustomed to speak with his Creator very profusely. All his prayers were that he should merit drawing close to God, and he had strong argumentations to present to God supporting this. Nevertheless, it always seemed to him that God took no notice of him and that he was not listening to him, but it seems that God was rather distancing him from serving him in all sorts of ways, as if he was not wanted at all. But it seemed that God was rather distancing himself from serving him in all sorts of ways, as if he was not wanted at all. He saw that many years were passing by and he was still far from God and had still not merited any closeness. So he concluded that no one was listening to his words and no one was taking any notice of him. He felt he was being pushed away from serving God with all forms of repulsion. Nevertheless, he would encourage himself greatly and never gave up. But several times, upon seeing that he was praying and pleading and begging so much for God to draw him to his service, yet feeling that he was being completely ignored, he became discouraged and would not speak much to God for several days. Then he would come then he would confront himself and be embarrassed that he had doubted God's goodness. For God is certainly kind and merciful, and certainly wants to draw him close. So he regained his determination and started again. So he regained his determination and started again to plead and speak to God as described above. This happened many times. We also find in the Shikhiran that the village of Spain, near the city of Medvedivka, where his father-in-law lived, was where the rebbe rose to greatness. Nanach, nachman, meuman was where the rebbe rose to greatness. A large river flows there, and countless reeds grow at its banks. Rebbe nachmans, nanach, nachman, meuman, a holy custom was to take a small raft and float out with it into the river, into this river. Even though he was not adept at guiding it, nevertheless he guided it behind the reeds where he could no longer be seen. And there he did what he did in prayer, and hisbodedus, fortunate is he, for indeed he merited amazing things, as can be seen clearly from his holy books. And in Heimerdan we find that he used to take a horse from his father-in-law's house and ride it out to some forest, where he would dismount the horse and tie it to a tree. He would then walk into the forest, for hisbodedus several times. The horse freed itself and fled from it. It fled home to his father-in-law's house. When they saw the horse coming back alone, they became very worried and concerned, imagining that he had certainly fallen off the horse. Other times heavy rain fell on him while he was in the forest, and he would arrive home soaking wet an hour or more into the night. See below number 28, where I have cited his holy teachings, that in a place where grasses grow, such as in fields or forests, it is very good to do hisbodedus. In the rebbe, nachman, meuman, says that the main thing that enabled him to reach this level was his behaving like a simpleton, a prosthetic, speaking profusely to his creator and reciting many psalms with simplicity. It was specifically through this that he achieved what he did. He said, if I had known that God would make of me what I am now, that is such a novelty, I would have been so zealous. I would have been so zealous in my service that I would have accomplished in one day what actually took me a full year of serving God to accomplish. He yearned greatly to reach the level of serving God as a prosthetic, saying, a prosthetic. He also said that he spoke with several great tzaddikim who told him that they too only reached their level by behaving like a prosthetic, by serving God with complete simplicity. By serving God with complete simplicity, with hisbodedus and speaking with the Creator. Through this, they reached what they reached. Fortunate are they. nachman, meuman, nachman, meuman. Also there we find that though Rabbi Nachman, nachman, meuman, had a special room in the village where he sat alone, he would usually go out to the field or the forest to do much hisbodedus there. Even once passed through Medvedivka with the rebbe, nachman, meuman, then walking about with him through the fields and hills outside the rebbe's earlier nachman, meuman, earlier place of residence. The rebbe, nachman, meuman, stretched out his hand over the fields and hills and said to him, I walked about countless times through all these fields and hills, that you see surrounding the town, and all the places in the region surrounding it, meaning that he did his hisbodedus in those places. He related at the time that atop the hill there is a very high place surrounding a valley. There is a very high place surrounding a valley. He would sometimes climb to the top of the hill and walk down into this valley where he loved to do hisbodedus, and other times he would go to different places. As said, all this was in Medvedivka, where he was already a renowned tzaddik while still living there. And this aside from all this hisbodedus he did inside the village is said, and later in Nezhebish, or then in Zlatopolye, and here in Breslov. He did much hisbodedus every day, occasionally an entire day. In Heimerdan we find that after the rebbe, nachman, meuman, became famous, Rebbe Shimon once traveled with him through the village of Osatin, where the rebbe nanach, nachman, meuman had toiled in his great devotions to God while living there in his father-in-law's house. As Rabbi Shimon was traveling along with the rebbe nach meuman through the fields, the rebbe nanach, meuman longed deeply and said, how good I had it here. With every step I sensed the Garden of Eden. There on those paths he would walk along and do hisbodedus. He then expressed intense pain and yearning and said, I had it so good here, why do I need the fame I have now? Another time he said that as a young man, after he would return from hisbodedus in the forests or fields, the entire world looked new in his eyes, as if it was a different world altogether. The world just did not appear to him as it had before. From Sichasadan, someone from Zlatakolya told me that when the rebbe nanach, nachman, meuman lived there, he prayed one summer morning very early, after which he sent his daughter Sarah to summon this man to come to him. Nachman, meuman said to come with me. nachman, meuman said to him, come with me for a walk. He accompanied the rebbe nachman, meuman outside the city, walking among the grasses until they came to a small mountain that was not far from the city. The man asked him, where are we going? And the rebbe nachman, meuman told him about the mountain. The rebbe nachman, meuman then asked him to accompany him there, and they went. The rebbe nachman, meuman then asked him to accompany him there, and they went. When they got inside, they could not be seen from the outside, for this mountain was hollow inside, and the hollow extended down into the mountain. So the two of them went in, and the rebbe nachman, meuman sat down on the ground, took out the book Sharetzim, began reciting it, and wept profusely. Continued reading page after page, weeping greatly without respite. The man stood near him holding his pipe, awed by the sight of his intense weeping. Rebbe nachman, meuman continued this for a long time, and when he finally stopped weeping, he instructed the man to go and look outside to see what time it was. He went out and saw that the day had already passed and the sun was about to set. He went out and saw that the day had already passed and the sun was about to set. So long had Rebbe Nachman, meuman spent there weeping, close to a full summer day without interruption. Also there, even after Rebbe Nachman, meuman moved to Omain, which was about half a year before his passing, by which time he had already reached an exalted spiritual level higher than any other human being had ever reached. Even there he practiced hisbodedus a great deal. Once while renting living quarters in a house in which he had a special room that the owner had permission to enter. The owner once indeed entered the room suddenly and found the rebbe meuman prostrating himself on the ground with his arms and legs stretched out. By this time the rebbe nachman, meuman was extremely weak. It was a miracle he was even alive, and he could have died at any moment, but nevertheless he did not abandon his good practices, following them simply until the final hour when he ascended to the upper worlds. Fortunate is he. I also heard that he said at the end of his life, if I had known in my youth what I know now of what one can merit through hisbodedus, I would not have harmed and depleted my precious body to such an extreme with fasting and self-mortification. In sum, he never rested or sat back, even in the days of his greatness. Although he reached very high and awesome levels of godly perception, he was not complacent with this, but toiled. He was not complacent with this, but toiled and strained all the time and at every moment, praying, supplicating, begging, and requesting profusely, yearning and desiring very intensely, always reaching ever higher levels of understanding. meuman. But as soon as he achieved this and was beginning to enjoy his attainment, he would suddenly let go of the past and begin anew, as if he was only beginning to enter the holiness of Jewish religious life. Sometimes we heard him say explicitly, with yearning and longing, how does one merit being a Jew? He said this with the greatest innocence, as if he had not begun at all, begging God with entreaties and yearnings and arguments. 1. Begging God with entreaties and yearnings and arguments. Begging God with entreaties and yearnings and arguments until he merited an even higher level. He did this continually until in the end he reached such a high level that it was impossible for anyone in a physical body to reach any higher, and his leaving this world at that point became inevitable. He said in these words, "I would already like to discard my robe," meaning the body. I would already like to discard my robe, meaning the body, because I cannot remain on the same level. And though the rebbe nanach, nachman, meuman merited what he did, his prayer and hisbodedus between himself and his creator was with a humble spirit and a broken heart and simplicity and innocence, as described in the nachman. It is related there that a young student once asked him how to do hisbodedus. The rebbe nanach, nachman, meuman then taught him to say, "Master of the universe, have mercy on me. How can my life just pass by in such meaninglessness? Was I created just for this?" Sometime later, this same man stood behind the wall of the rebbe's room, nanach, nachma, meuman, and heard how he poured out his heart before God with words just like these. In the teaching I strayed like a lost sheep. The rebbe nanach, nachman, meuman explains that God's way is to call a person immediately upon seeing that he is straying from the proper path. There are those whom he calls with hints, those whom he calls outright, and those whom he kicks and beats. For the Torah proclaimed before them, "Foolish ones, how long will you love foolishness?" Now the Torah is God himself who calls them and asks them to return to him. Thus, when someone has still not strayed far from the proper path, he can return easily, since he can still recognize the voice of God and the Torah. He is familiar with the voice, having just recently been close to God and heard his voice, the voice of the Torah. He has not forgotten it and can therefore return easily. This can be compared to a shepherd. When one of his sheep strays from the path, he immediately calls to it. If the sheep has still not strayed too far from the path, it recognizes the voice and follows it immediately. But when it has strayed very far from the path, it forgets the voice of the shepherd and does not recognize it any longer. The shepherd himself gives up searching for it, realizing that it has already strayed from him a long time. Similarly, when a person has already spent much time in improper behavior, turning away and straying far from the proper path to corrupt and mistaken paths, it is then difficult for him to return. This is alluded to in the verse, "I strayed like a lost sheep." That is, I strayed from the proper path like a lost sheep that left the path. One. That is, I strayed from the proper path like a lost sheep that left the path. Therefore, as the verse concludes, this is alluded to in the verse, "I strayed like a lost sheep." That is, I strayed from the proper path like a lost sheep that left the path. Therefore, as the verse concludes, "Search for your servants, for I have not forgotten your mitzvahs." That is, hurry to search for me immediately, for I still remember and have still not forgotten the voice of your mitzvahs. That is, hurry to search for me immediately, for I still remember and have still not forgotten the voice of your mitzvahs. And we find in nachman that when Rebbe Nachman and meuman revealed this lesson, he said to Rebbe Nosson that this idea was the focus of his hisbodedus at that time. So now, after hearing a bit of the amazing awesomeness of his efforts to serve God from the time of his very early youth as is described in Sichsaran and Chaimaran, and the vastness of his wondrous, awesome, and holy perceptions, as can be perceived somewhat to anyone who pursues his holy books, from which the world has merited benefiting, not to speak of the holy compilations from which the world did not merit benefiting, such as the books he instructed to burn, and his hidden book, and aspect of God. God saw that the light was good, as Rashi comments, good to hide. Besides, from the hidden depths of wisdom he merited attaining, the very existence of which we never even merited knowing or hearing about. If you will reflect on the fact that after all this he would serve God with such sincere simplicity, saying before God, I strayed like a lost sheep, in the manner described above, you will be astonished at the awesome and innocent righteousness of the rebbe, nanach, nachman, meuman. But the truth is that King David himself said this very verse at the end of chapter 119 of Psalms, which contains very awesome and exalted secrets, as do all the chapters of Psalms, which are all filled with very awesome and wondrous secrets. And who does not know and believe the tremendous level of King David, who nevertheless said of himself, I strayed like a lost sheep, for God's greatness is beyond conception. For God's greatness is beyond conception. Likewise there be nachmans, nanach, nachman, meuman. Great weeping before God is impossible to conceive and relate it all, but I will nevertheless relate here succinctly some of his words from his holy discourses. In Shibhiran we find that all his learning came to him with great effort. When he began learning Mishnayos, he would not understand anything and would try a great deal before God to open his eyes to his Torah, until he finally merited understanding the Mishnayos. Similarly, when he later began studying the Talmud, he also did not understand it and would weep profusely until he merited understanding it as well. And when he grew older and began studying the Holy Surah and the writings of the Hari, he would also weep a great deal before God until he merited understanding everything he learned through his prayer and weeping. From this we see that even in his youth he was very accustomed to weeping before God over each service of God. In Chaimaran we find that when he was only a child of 6, he once yearned intensely to receive the Shabbos fittingly. In great holiness he went to the bathhouse on Friday afternoon. Immediately after noontime immersed himself quickly and returned immediately home, donned his Shabbos clothes, went to the study hall and wandered back and forth, wanting to draw on himself the holiness of Shabbos. Went to the study hall and wandered back and forth, wanting to draw on himself the holiness of Shabbos and the additional soul that Jews receive on Shabbos. He yearned to have some spiritual vision, but he saw nothing. Meanwhile, people began entering the study hall. One leading figure entered and stood next to his private prayer lectern and began reciting the Song of Psalms, the Song of Songs. The young rebbe nachman, nanach, nachman, meuman stuck his head under the lectern ständer, and since he was a small child, no one minded him. So he sat there and began weeping before God. He wept profusely for several hours until the evening, until his eyes became swollen. When he then opened his eyes, it seemed to him that he saw some lights, since the Shabbos lights had already been lit, and his eyes were so bleary from weeping. This consoled him somewhat. Even when he later matured, he did not leave this holy path, as we see from the story related earlier about his going to do hisbodedus outside Latapolia with another man during his stay there, after returning from the land of Israel, when he went profusely before God for an entire summer day without respite. I heard from my father and mentor, I heard from my father and mentor that Rabbi Nachman, nachman, meuman, once sat in his room weeping profusely before God. The tears fell from his eyes to the ground until the ground became so soaked with his tears that the heel of his shoe became stuck to the ground from the moisture of the tears. I also heard from my father that after Rebbe nachman, nachma, meuman had once circled the ark with the lulav and esrog during the festival of Sikkis, his followers noticed that the floor underneath where he had circled the ark had become wet with the tears he had shed while circling nachman meuman. We find in Chaimaran that the rebbe nachman, meuman once gave his old talus as a gift to one of his major followers, saying to him, be very careful to give proper respect to talus for the number. Respect to this talus for the number of threads in this talus are the amount of tears I shed before God until I knew what a talus is. He also said that whenever he reveals a teaching, he would weep beforehand. He's also said that whenever he reveals a teaching, he would weep beforehand. He revealed a wondrous secret about this in the Kitamaran. He revealed a wondrous secret about this in the Kitamaran, writing there that from the well springs of one's Torah novel flow rivers, and the forces of evil come to drink from these rivers. Therefore one must weep before revealing novel Torah teachings, transforming these tears into rivers. The forces of evil then drink from these rivers, created from the weeping like one. The forces of evil then drink from these rivers, created from the weeping, which prevents their drawing from the novel Torah teachings. Therefore a Talmudic tractate containing Torah laws and teachings is called a Masechet. As in Masachti, I mixed my tears in my drink. For novel Torah teachings must be mixed with tears. This is also the aspect of the rivers of Babylon, the aspect of the rivers made from the novel teachings encompassed in the Babylonian Talmud. There Yeshavnu, we sat an aspect of the holy yeshivas where these teachings were studied and also wept, for one must weep beforehand. As said the rebbe nanach, meuman always went around very broken hearted and was rarely cheerful. We heard that this was because his family, the family of the Baal Shem Tov, was descended from the house of David, as is known, and since King David always had a broken heart, as is evident from the book of Psalms, most of which is passionate words of wailing and supplication expressed by a very broken heart. Therefore his descendants to our own times usually also have broken hearts. Nevertheless, he warned us very much to be joyful at all times, saying that people on our level can easily fall from a broken heart into depression. Hence one must set aside an hour each day to evoke a broken heart and express oneself before God, but the rest of the day one should be only joyful. Specifically through the joy, one will easily be able to set aside an hour a day for brokenheartedness before God. Fortunate is the one who merits following these ways and customs, through which one will certainly merit a good end. Nanach, nachman, meuman, that is a level Tamidia, you could yag the Hokin and a simio, my borders, like you, like my father, the clean business, shift the Kim of the Saki, my borders, nachman, meuman. It is a gal of so big, more of a good Mikava, side you cave, the Hisbel boy, the Tegi name, to Miss Anna, join me. Miss Anna, Moda, you crucial, that is a level Tamidia, you could yag the Hokin and a simio, my borders, my fire over the team. Mashiach came, it's not very much about boys, nachman, meuman, a gala look for soy be he, moon of a good schmick, habit, sadi, paid, sadi, cave, it's the boy, it's Simming it's on the time, so I'm sure it's on and void. Or you cushion me, the guy is the level to media, you could have the full king, it's the mere not for the stuff, you left home out, I'm five. Bins Mashiach betim gesagt mir matva wurde stafu nach nachman mit meuman was geula ich soll wohl der gut mit kap side ikay it's a word it's heavy nay zum zane tams yoni she ain't comes ane